Hey guys, tonight we're going to quietly drift back into history. Not the wars, not the coronations, not the big speeches, but something quieter, slower, and a little more human. We're going to explore the world of Victorian London, but not the polite drawing rooms or the stiffly scented parlors where ladies nibbled cakes and wrote letters. Instead, we're going to move down the narrower streets, past the gas lamps flickering against wet cobblestones, to the rooms behind the discreet doors where women worked for survival, society's rules tucked neatly outside. It's a world that operated by its own rhythms, its own strange logic, one of careful precision, practiced gestures, and a kind of mechanical grace that allowed life to continue smoothly, even when the lives themselves were messy, truncated, or painfully constrained. There's a soft irony in it, of course, because the very existence of these houses relied on the moral strictures that condemned them and the economy that made them necessary. But that irony, gentle as it is the sort that creeps into your awareness slowly, the kind that makes you reflect without realizing you're thinking at all. The women who worked in these establishments weren't naive or helpless, though appearances often suggested otherwise. They were skilled, and their skill was not only in conversation or appearance, though both mattered greatly. It was in timing, in reading a room, in understanding the subtle language of gestures and moods. The house itself trained them as much as any teacher or parent might through repetition and close observation. Every movement, every tilt of a head, every glance had a purpose, though that purpose might seem invisible to anyone not attuned to the rhythms of the work. Rooms were prepared with careful attention. Not every detail mattered, but the ones that did mattered enormously. Sheets, freshly laundered, laid out without a wrinkle that could betray carelessness. Fires lit to produce warmth without smoke, the soft glow that flattered rather than revealed. A vase of flowers, a small luxury that created an illusion of refinement in the otherwise functional space. Chairs positioned just so, pillows arranged to suggest comfort. The women knew these arrangements intimately, every detail learned, not as decoration but as a tool in a quiet, ongoing negotiation with the expectations of those who would come through the doors. Clients arrived in predictable patterns, men from theaters, clubs, offices, homes, all bearing their own anxieties, desires, and social masks. Some were quiet, preferring conversation to distraction, others eager for the physicality of the evening with little interest in words. The careful assessment, often unconscious, began immediately. Posture, tone, dress, scent, and subtle clues like the slight calluses on a hand or the ring worn loosely on a finger. It was a world where observation mattered more than judgment, where every small signal could shape the night's interaction. One of the more unusual aspects of the work, at least to someone not familiar with the profession, was the combination of intimacy and detachment. Physical closeness, often extreme, paired with an emotional and psychological distance maintained with precision. There was a skill to this that required not only patience, but an almost meditative focus. Women learned it over months, then years, refining the ability to appear completely engaged while simultaneously cataloging, categorizing, and assessing each encounter. The mind remained alert, the body compliant, creating a balance that allowed the work to be sustained night after night. Evenings could be long. Some clients required only a brief visit, while others lingered in conversation, their drink, their own careful performance of civility. It was not unusual for the dialogue to drift into surprising directions: politics, literature, current events, personal grievances, all framed in a soft veneer of curiosity or flirtation. The women learned quickly which conversational pathways were safe, which might provoke discomfort, and which might offer genuine interest without breaking the professional boundaries necessary for their safety and sanity. The houses themselves had their own routines. The head of the establishment, often a woman of keen perception and iron discipline, orchestrated the evening quietly but firmly. Rooms were assigned with an efficiency that suggested experience and perhaps a touch of stubborn intuition. The more experienced women guided newcomers through these routines, teaching not only practical skills but the subtle navigation of expectations. Each evening unfolded according to these rhythms, a choreography that allowed multiple interactions to occur simultaneously without collisions or missteps, a quiet ballet of necessity. Meals, when taken at all, were brief and functional, small, restorative foods, enough to maintain strength but not to distract from the work. Tea, strong and sweet, was poured and sipped with care. Conversation during these breaks was practical and immediate, a shared acknowledgement of fatigue, of minor annoyances, or small victories of the night. Humor, dry and understated, often appeared in these moments, an ironic commentary on the world outside the house, the absurdities of the clients, or the little failures of arrangements that were never quite perfect. Hygiene and preparation were constant concerns. Hands and faces washed, hair arranged, dress carefully adjusted. Every crease, every fold, every detail mattered because the impression created in the first moments could not be recaptured later. These preparations extended beyond mere appearance. They were part of a professional persona, a practiced readiness that signaled competence and control. Every action, repeated enough times, became automatic, allowing the mind to drift quietly while the body executed the necessary motions with graceful efficiency. Beyond the practical, there was the subtle work of emotional management. The women navigated not only the desires and moods of their clients, but the complexities of their own feelings, which could be tangled, contradictory, or suppressed entirely. Fatigue, irritation, fleeting affection, curiosity, and disdain could coexist without disrupting the carefully maintained balance. These emotional calibrations were part of the craft, invisible to the casual observer, but essential to maintaining stability in a profession that demanded both precision and resilience. Illness and injury were constant companions. Fingers blistered from long hours of work, throats hoarse from extended conversation, exhaustion settling in muscles and bones. Yet there was a rhythm to this as well. The women learned to recognize the signs, to rest when possible, to push through when necessary. The body became a familiar instrument, signaling when to adjust, when to pause, when to endure. There was an understated pride in this resilience, an unspoken acknowledgement of survival in a society that offered few protections. Money, of course, dictated much of the interaction, but not entirely. While the transactional nature of the profession was clear, the layers of nuance went beyond simple exchange. Some clients paid for conversation as much as for the physical, some for appearance or companionship, some for the sense of control or status their presence implied. The women, understanding these distinctions, navigated each encounter accordingly, balancing attention, charm, and detachment in a careful equilibrium that allowed both sides to fulfill expectations. There were patterns in the work that emerged over weeks and months. Certain clients became regulars, their presence predictable, their preferences learned and anticipated. Others were fleeting, momentary, their impact small but not insignificant. The women tracked these patterns silently, cataloging both for professional efficiency and for a quiet understanding of the world they inhabited. Relationships, when they occurred, were subtle, often unspoken. marked by small acknowledgments rather than overt attachments. Even the architecture of the houses reflected these routines. Stairways designed to separate public and private areas, doors arranged for discretion, rooms equipped to maximize comfort without excess, lighting calibrated to flatter and obscure in equal measure. These details, often unnoticed by those outside, were the silent scaffolding upon which the evening's work rested, allowing it to function smoothly, predictably, and with a measure of grace that belied the moral complexity of the enterprise. Beyond the walls of the house, the city moved in its own rhythms. Rain pattered against windows, streets glistened under gaslight, carriages clattered over cobblestones, and distant voices carried across alleys. The women observed these patterns with mild interest, noting how weather, social events, or economic changes might influence the flow of clients. It was a quiet, practical attention, part curiosity, part professional necessity, a small interaction between the house and the larger world it existed within. Night after night, the routine repeated: preparation, interaction, assessment, restoration, and brief moments of respite in private rooms or quiet corners. Sleep, when it came, was deep and restorative, a necessary pause in the ongoing performance. Dreams, if they arrived, were often muted, fragments of memory and desire mingling with imagined escapes, always tempered by the practicalities of the next day. And then, inevitably, the cycle began again, a measured, continuous rhythm that carried the women through the long hours of a city that never entirely rested, just as they themselves moved through lives carefully balanced between necessity, skill, and quiet endurance. And as one evening folded into another, one encounter into the next, the women learned the subtleties of their craft, the precise tilt of a head to convey interest, the gentle touch that established a connection without promise, the soft words that could entertain, soothe, or distract. Each movement, each glance, each gesture became a tool, honed through repetition, observation, and the sometimes harsh lessons of experience. There was a rhythm to this, a slow, almost meditative flow, as familiar and reliable as the ticking of the clock in the hallway or the steady drip of rain against the panes. And in these moments, small insights emerged, a recognition of human desire, always idiosyncratic and frequently contradictory, an understanding that appearances could be deceiving, that confidence often masked insecurity, that wealth and power did not necessarily produce grace, and that the quiet endurance of a skilled worker could surpass any formal authority in subtle influence and efficacy. It was a world where power existed in unexpected forms, often invisible, and where survival required attentiveness as much as strength, patience as much as charm. Even when the night seemed quiet, the house maintained a pulse of activity, a faint shuffle in the hall, the soft creak of floorboards, the muffled laughter that drifted from an adjoining room. Each sound was catalogued unconsciously, each minor disturbance assessed for significance. The women moved through these spaces with practiced ease, adjusting their steps to avoid collisions, whispering to one another with a soft efficiency that suggested both camaraderie and necessity. There was an unspoken understanding, a code of behavior, a rhythm that allowed multiple lives to intersect in close quarters without tipping into chaos. The newcomers often struggled at first. Their hands trembled slightly as they folded sheets, arranged chairs, or brushed hair into the precise angles deemed suitable by the house. They observed the older women carefully, learning the language of gestures, the quiet art of attention, the subtle cues that indicated when to engage and when to retreat. Mistakes were not harshly punished, but they were noted, corrected with gentle irony. A soft shake of the head, a murmured instruction, a slight frown that said everything without ever raising the voice. Experience became a teacher, and repetition the patient tutor. Some women arrived with stories already etched into their manner, a world-weary expression, or a carefully guarded glance that suggested past trials. Others came with naivete, a certain hesitant hope that the night might be different from what it had been described. These variations created a quiet hierarchy of knowledge and adaptability, a system of informal mentorship that moved slowly but efficiently. The older, more skilled women observed, corrected, guided, and occasionally commiserated, forming alliances that were fragile but necessary for survival. The clients themselves were a study in contradiction. Some arrived punctilious, the very image of order and civility, only to reveal moments of clumsiness, impatience, or insecurity once the initial interaction unfolded. Others presented as chaotic, careless, or awkward, yet demonstrated surprising moments of insight, generosity, or attentiveness. The women quickly learned to read these layers, often through micro observations, the direction of a gaze, the tension in a hand, the subtle change in tone. There was a quiet skill in this assessment, a form of expertise that required neither formal training nor overt recognition, but was essential to functioning effectively in the night's delicate social economy. Illness was always a background presence. Fever, cough, fatigue, and occasional accidents were dealt with quietly, without dramatization, because the work did not pause for inconvenience. Remedies were simple and often improvised: a warm compress, a cup of tea, extra rest if possible. Sometimes the older women would whisper advice drawn from experience or folk knowledge, a blend of practical sense and superstition that proved remarkably effective. The body, in these circumstances, became both an instrument and a challenge, requiring constant attention, careful calibration, and patience. Sleep, when it could be claimed, was often shallow, brief, and reluctant. The women learned to rest in fragments, to extract small periods of recuperation amid the demands of their work. They became adept at napping while sitting upright, dozing while conversing quietly, and sustaining energy through mental focus and the occasional sip of tea or water. There was a rhythm to this exhaustion, a predictable weariness that neither diminished skill nor dulled awareness, but became another layer of the quiet, continuous flow of life within the house. Money and its distribution carried subtle complexity. Earnings were divided according to established rules, known and respected by everyone. Some portion went to the house for rent, maintenance, and supplies. Another portion was retained for personal use, saved or spent with care, often in small, carefully chosen indulgences. Jewelry, books, a new dress, small luxuries that offered an illusion of personal choice in an otherwise structured existence. These choices mattered not for extravagance, but for preserving a sense of agency and individuality, quietly asserting autonomy in a world that offered few alternatives. Romantic or personal attachments, when they arose, were subtle, muted, and rarely overt. The work demanded detachment, emotional management, and discretion, leaving little room for overt affection. Yet, alliances formed quietly, gestures exchanged in private moments, a shared understanding that was never formally declared. These relationships were often fragile, bounded by circumstance and necessity, and understood implicitly rather than expressed verbally. They provided comfort and occasionally relief, small refuges in the otherwise structured and demanding world of the house. Generations of women sometimes passed through the same house, creating a lineage of shared knowledge, habit, and observation. The older women, having endured years of the same routines, guided the younger with patience, sarcasm, and gentle irony, a mentorship system that reinforced continuity without formal teaching. The environment shaped behavior, expectations, and skill over time, creating a culture that was both subtle and rigid, adaptive yet remarkably consistent. The daily routines outside the evenings were no less structured. Morning light revealed the soft chaos of cleaning, laundering, and maintenance. Beds were stripped, sheets washed, fires extinguished or rekindled. Rooms were inspected for residual signs of the night's activity, organized to restore order and calm. Supplies were accounted for: soaps, towels, linens, candles, and flowers, each item meticulously tracked. There was a quiet satisfaction in this labor, a sense of accomplishment that was rarely acknowledged aloud but understood internally. Even in these chores, subtle lessons emerged. The care taken in arranging a room reflected broader principles of discipline and foresight. An untended sheet, a misplaced chair, a candle burned too low, all small lapses with potential consequences. Attention to these details became second nature, a constant undercurrent of consciousness guiding each movement, gesture, and decision. In a way, the women mastered the environment as much as they mastered the interactions within it, shaping both the physical and social spaces to maintain equilibrium. Beyond the walls of the house, the city offered both challenges and opportunities. Weather could alter attendance, influence moods, or dictate the flow of clients. Rain, wind, or fog changed the streetscape, the pace of carriages, and the timing of arrivals. Festivals, fairs, or social events introduced fluctuations that required quick adjustment. The women, attuned to these patterns, navigated both the predictable and the unpredictable with a quiet pragmatism that was rarely acknowledged but always essential. Medical emergencies occasionally punctuated the routine. Illness, injury, or sudden collapse were addressed swiftly, with discretion and efficiency. Houses often maintained basic remedies and knowledge, drawn from experience, folk wisdom, or practical necessity. Doctors were summoned when needed, though with caution, because medical attention could attract unwanted scrutiny. The women learned to balance risk, practicality, and the well being of those under their care, cultivating a subtle expertise in crisis management that complemented the more visible skills of performance and engagement. Hierarchy within the house was both subtle and rigid. The head of the establishment commanded respect not only through authority but through accumulated knowledge and presence. Their judgments were seldom questioned openly, though discussion occurred quietly behind doors. The assistants, senior women, and newcomers understood their positions implicitly, learning over time the nuances of obedience, discretion, and initiative. This hierarchy, while understated, maintained the smooth operation of the house, ensuring that each evening progressed without significant disruption or disorder. The clothing worn by the women was carefully considered, fashionable enough to satisfy expectations, practical enough to allow movement, and selected with an understanding of its psychological effect. Color, cut, texture, and adornment were all carefully calibrated. Certain details signaled availability, others hinted at temperament, and still others conveyed subtle status within the house. These choices were neither frivolous nor ostentatious, but purposeful, designed to achieve maximum effect with minimal expenditure. Conversations during work followed a quiet rhythm. Humor, often dry, punctuated interactions. Irony crept into observations, gently acknowledging absurdities without anger or exaggeration. Complaints were muted, often expressed through subtle gestures or sighs rather than direct statements. The women learned to interpret these signals, responding with appropriate attention, empathy, or amusement. These exchanges, while minor, maintained social cohesion, morale, and an understated sense of community within the otherwise transactional environment. Some clients arrived with more complex motives, seeking not only physical engagement but companionship, advice, or even psychological relief. The women, trained in observation and assessment, adjusted accordingly, offering conversational navigation, measured responses, and calibrated emotional presence. This labor required skill, patience, and a nuanced understanding of human behavior. It blurred the lines between work and empathy, performance and authenticity, and created layers of interaction that were rarely visible to the casual observer but central to the ongoing rhythm of the house. Sleep patterns, rest periods, and private time were carefully managed. A nap in a quiet corner, a brief escape into a favorite book, a moment spent quietly watching the rain, all served to preserve mental equilibrium. These moments were small but essential, providing space for reflection, recuperation, and occasional indulgence. The women learned to maximize these opportunities, using them to recharge, to process, and to maintain a sense of self within the continuous demands of their environment. The architecture of the house influenced behavior as much as the women themselves. Narrow hallways, small staircases, discreet doors, and partitioned rooms directed movement, preserved privacy, and facilitated operational efficiency. Lighting was soft, carefully controlled to flatter, to conceal imperfections, and to create an impression of warmth. Furnishings were simple, functional, and occasionally decorative, calibrated to balance appearance with practical use. This environment, designed and refined over years, shaped not only daily routines but the emotional and psychological landscape in which the women operated. Evenings occasionally brought surprises, an unexpected visitor, a momentary emergency, or a new pattern of client behavior. These were managed calmly, with an understated flexibility that maintained continuity without overt disruption. Adaptation was part of the craft, a skill as essential as appearance, conversation, or timing. The women navigated these changes without comment or drama, their actions precise, measured, and almost ritualistic in their smooth execution. The combination of routine, observation, performance, and care created a subtle rhythm, almost hypnotic in its regularity. Each evening followed its own gentle arc, each action flowing into the next, each interaction layered with small calculations and considerations. Over weeks, months, and years, this rhythm became second nature, a continuous meditation in motion, a quiet mastery of a challenging and morally complicated space. Training newcomers remained a constant necessity. Those with little experience required guidance in timing, gesture, conversation, and assessment. Mistakes were corrected gently, often with an ironic smile or a softly muttered remark that both instructed and soothed. Learning was incremental, practical, and immersive, embedded in the flow of daily activity rather than informal instruction. By the end of their initial months, most women moved through the house with a quiet confidence, their actions efficient, their observations sharp, and their presence both calming and effective. The work continued night after night, a continuous interplay of observation, skill, and endurance. The women learned not only to manage clients, but to manage themselves, to sustain emotional equilibrium, physical resilience, and social subtlety in a setting that required constant adjustment. Their lives, while constrained and often harsh, were marked by competence, adaptability, and a quiet dignity that history rarely acknowledges. Some nights passed without incident, quiet and predictable, filled with the soft sounds of footsteps, conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter. Others carried minor crisis, an unexpected illness, a disagreement, a client who misjudged boundaries, but even these were managed without fuss, absorbed into the ongoing rhythm of the house. There was a continuous tension between routine and disruption, between expectation and unpredictability, a gentle balancing act that defined daily life and required constant attention. And in the midst of all this, the women developed their own subtle economies, informal systems of support and mentorship. Advice was shared quietly, gestures exchanged that conveyed information without words, minor favors rendered and reciprocated with careful timing. These networks were delicate but resilient, forming a social structure that complemented the formal hierarchy of the house and allowed the environment to function smoothly. The broader society outside the house was never far from awareness. The women understood the social codes, the moral judgments, and the economic realities that shaped their work. They navigated these forces with quiet pragmatism, using discretion, skill, and timing to maintain safety and autonomy. This awareness shaped not only interactions with clients, but the internal dynamics of the house, informing decisions about presentation, conversation, and movement. The faint flicker of candlelight revealed the worn edges of the furniture, the gentle imperfections of the walls, and the soft shadows that shifted with each movement. The women, moving with practiced grace, interacted with these elements unconsciously, aware of the effects without conscious calculation. Every gesture, tilt of the head, and step contributed to a larger pattern of perception and response, a choreography that maintained the smooth functioning of the house. And yet, despite the precision, the rhythm, and the care, there were moments of quiet reflection, small pauses in the continuous flow of activity. A woman might pause at a window to watch the rain, noticing the shimmer of gas lamps on wet cobblestones. She might adjust a vase of flowers with a gentle sigh, taking a brief measure of satisfaction in the restored order. These moments, fleeting and often private, offered a gentle reminder of individuality and personal agency within a structured and demanding environment, a soft assertion of self in the midst of labor. The nights continued, the cycles repeated, and the women moved through the spaces with the smooth confidence that comes from long experience. Each detail, each gesture, each observation built upon previous nights, creating a continuous accumulation of knowledge, skill, and subtle mastery. The city outside continued its rhythms, indifferent, while the house maintained its own pulse, separate yet connected, a world within a world where the quiet work of human interaction unfolded with precision, care, and gentle endurance. The minor irritations, the fleeting frustrations, the small triumphs and defeats each became part of a larger pattern, a continuous narrative of adjustment, observation, and adaptation. Over time, these experiences were absorbed into memory, forming an intricate web of understanding that guided decisions, informed interactions, and shaped the quiet confidence with which the women moved through their nightly labor. And even as exhaustion set in, a subtle awareness persisted. The faint hum of the street beyond, the gentle flicker of gaslight, the soft echo of footsteps, all blended into the background of consciousness, providing rhythm and continuity. The work, while demanding, became meditative in its repetition, each night a layering of gesture, observation, and interaction that carried both challenges and rewards. The women, through these repeated cycles, cultivated an expertise that was invisible yet essential, a quiet authority within a constrained and morally complicated environment. There were certain women who seemed almost timeless, figures who had moved through the house for years, whose presence became part of the furniture, part of the atmosphere, as unnoticed and as necessary as the soft drip of water from the gutters outside. They carried themselves with a quiet authority, not imposed through force, but through sheer familiarity with the rhythms, the needs, and the unspoken rules that governed every interaction. Newcomers quickly learned to watch these women, to observe the small gestures, the subtle shifts of expression, the way they navigated clients with minimal fuss and maximum effect. There was a sense of inevitability in their movements, a slow certainty that whatever arose, they had already seen it, handled it, and could handle it again without raising the voice or breaking stride. The younger women, on the other hand, often approached each evening with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity. Their initial nervousness was visible in the way they fidgeted with clothing, adjusted their hair repeatedly, or misjudged timing in conversation. A slight pause, a half smile, a small misstep, and they would quickly sense the reaction, internalize it, and adjust. Learning was slow at first, as if the house itself were testing them, but over weeks, these tentative movements solidified into confident gestures, a natural ease that mirrored those who had been there for years. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible night by night, but cumulative, shaping them into efficient participants in a complex social ballet. The clients were, of course, endlessly variable. Some arrived with a formal, almost rehearsed demeanor, offering polite conversation that was pleasant but mechanical. Others were brash, impatient, or fumbling, as if they had never been instructed in the gentle art of human interaction. The women adapted quietly, reading the nuances of posture, inflection, and hesitation, responding with precisely calibrated gestures, speech, and attention. A raised eyebrow, a slight nod, the carefully measured tilt of a head all became tools of influence, allowing the women to maintain control over encounters without ever speaking sharply or appearing overtly commanding. In many ways, the work resembled a form of theater, though one performed without scripts, rehearsals, or an audience that could judge openly. Each interaction was improvisation within constraints, a performance guided by accumulated experience, observation, and intuition. Subtlety was paramount. A smile too broad could signal false familiarity. A glance too prolonged could miscommunicate interest, and the misreading of a gesture could result in discomfort or awkwardness. Mastery was not immediate. It was earned over months and years through repetition, reflection, and careful attention to detail. Illness remained a constant shadow. Colds, fevers, minor injuries, and periodic exhaustion were expected companions, quietly acknowledged and managed without dramatization. Remedies were practical and often improvised, ranging from warm compresses to herbal teas, the occasional poultice, or a brief rest when possible. Knowledge of these treatments was transmitted orally, through observation, and through small adjustments, creating a form of internal medical culture that was as much about prevention as cure. There was a subtle humor in these moments, the irony that the women, surrounded by vitality and desire, had to manage so many quiet ailments, but it was never cruel, only quietly acknowledged, almost as if nodding to the absurdities of the human body. Even as physical demands continued, the emotional labor remained significant. The women were expected to engage, to respond, to maintain attention, and to mirror desire, all while managing their own internal states. Emotional detachment was impossible, but careful modulation allowed them to navigate the space without becoming overwhelmed. Humor, often dry, was deployed sparingly but effectively. A soft comment here, a slight ironic sigh there, a whispered observation that allowed tension to ease without calling attention. These small interventions became critical tools for maintaining equilibrium. The architecture of the house reinforced this rhythm. Narrow hallways guided movement, doorways framed gestures, and the soft glow of lamps created both intimacy and concealment. Each room, each partition, each piece of furniture contributed to a carefully balanced environment designed to facilitate privacy, efficiency, and discreet observation. The women learned to move within this architecture as instinctively as they moved through interactions, using space to regulate attention, control engagement, and manage perception. Routine tasks punctuated each day. Linen was laundered, polished, and folded. Rooms were cleaned and arranged. Supplies inventoried. These chores were neither tedious nor trivial. They were the foundation upon which the more visible labor rested. A misplaced towel, an untended table, a candle burned too low could disrupt the careful equilibrium of the house. Attention to these details became second nature, embedded in unconscious awareness, ensuring that the environment remained both functional and psychologically stabilizing. Hierarchy within the house was subtle, enforced less by authority than by accumulated knowledge and presence. The head of the house exerted influence through experience, judgment, and quiet oversight. Senior women guided newcomers with a combination of ironic observation, gentle correction, and practical advice. Authority was acknowledged implicitly. Insubordination was rare, unnecessary, and often resolved through understated social pressure rather than confrontation. Within this structure, each woman knew her role, her scope of influence, and the limits of her autonomy, creating a self-regulating system that functioned smoothly despite the challenges of human unpredictability. Evenings occasionally brought unpredictability. A client might arrive unexpectedly early, a minor crisis could unfold in the hallways, or a sudden medical concern could demand attention. Adaptation was constant, requiring both composure and initiative. The women managed these challenges with practiced calm, blending observation, improvisation, and social skill to restore equilibrium without fuss or overt display. These moments, while minor, reinforced the importance of vigilance, flexibility, and emotional control in the continuous operation of the house. Social dynamics among the women were equally intricate. Alliances formed through shared experience, mutual aid, or subtle mentorship. Conflicts arose occasionally but were typically managed with restraint, humor, or discreet negotiation. The women developed informal networks of support, sharing advice, resources, and emotional guidance. These networks were fragile, dependent on discretion and trust, yet remarkably resilient, allowing the house to function as a coherent social system despite the pressures of work, hierarchy, and human temperament. Clothing and appearance were carefully calibrated. Dresses, fabrics, and adornments were chosen not only for aesthetic appeal but for psychological effect both on clients and within the social hierarchy of the house. Color, cut, texture, and detail communicated subtle messages: availability, temperament, skill, or status. Mastery of presentation was an ongoing exercise, requiring attention to seasonal fashion, client expectation, and personal comfort. The women became adept at balancing these factors, creating a visual language that was quietly persuasive, emotionally strategic, and socially functional. Communication, both verbal and nonverbal, was honed with subtlety. Tone, inflection, gaze, gesture, and timing were all calibrated to achieve desired outcomes, maintain control, and navigate social complexities. Humor, irony, and understated commentary were deployed strategically, allowing tension to ease, relationships to stabilize, and interactions to flow smoothly. Silence, pauses, and subtle cues were equally powerful, conveying understanding, authority, or caution without overt speech. This language of subtlety, learned through observation and experience, became essential for functioning effectively within the house's social environment. The physical layout reinforced these interactions. Partitioned rooms, curtained doorways, and narrow corridors dictated proximity and movement, preserving privacy while allowing supervision. Lighting was soft, controlled, and flattering, masking imperfections and guiding attention. Furniture was arranged to facilitate ease of movement, discreet engagement, and functional comfort. Over time, these physical features were internalized, shaping behavior almost unconsciously, guiding decisions about where to stand, how to move, and how to interact. Even in the quietest hours, attention remained constant. The faint creak of a floorboard, the subtle change in breathing, the smallest shift in posture, all were observed and interpreted. This vigilance was not constant anxiety, but a form of calibrated awareness, balancing presence with detachment. The women's skills extended beyond performance to continuous, silent observation, allowing them to manage both the environment and the people within it with efficiency and discretion. Sleep remained fragmented. Short naps, brief moments of rest while sitting upright, and carefully timed breaks provided small reserves of energy. These intervals were often interwoven with minor tasks, folding linens, tidying spaces, or arranging clothing, allowing rest without interruption of routine. Over time, the women became adept at extracting maximal recovery from minimal sleep, maintaining composure, performance, and social attentiveness despite chronic fatigue. The social rhythms of the broader city influenced the house subtly but persistently. Seasonal festivals, market days, weather changes, and local events created fluctuations in client patterns, mood, and attendance. The women observed, adapted, and anticipated these variations, adjusting schedules, appearances, and strategies to accommodate both predictable and unexpected changes. This adaptability, combined with accumulated experience, created a resilient system capable of sustaining operations across diverse circumstances. Medical knowledge was practical, applied, and often informal. Common remedies, folk wisdom, and observations passed through generations informed responses to illness, injury, and fatigue. Doctors were consulted sparingly, both for discretion and financial prudence. Women became skilled at assessment, treatment, and risk management, balancing immediate needs with longer term health considerations. This expertise, though largely invisible to outsiders, was critical to sustaining the ongoing flow of activity and maintaining personal well being within a physically and emotionally demanding environment. Emotional labor persisted alongside physical work. The women managed their own feelings, modulated responses to clients, and navigated interpersonal dynamics with subtle skill. Empathy, detachment, humor, and quiet observation were all applied in combination, creating a complex emotional landscape in which performance, authenticity, and strategic interaction were interwoven. Mastery of this labor was gradual, cumulative, and essential, allowing the women to maintain stability, composure, and professional efficacy in a context that offered few easy rules. The quiet authority of long tenured women was never asserted through force. Instead, it emanated through composure, knowledge, and subtle influence. Their guidance shaped new entrants, managed client expectations, and stabilized internal dynamics. Respect was earned, observed, and reciprocated, creating a form of social cohesion that was both durable and delicate. Leadership in this context was almost invisible, exercised through action, observation, and example rather than overt command, and was central to the ongoing operation and continuity of the house. Some women arrived with pasts that were almost impossible to separate from the present, histories that shadowed them quietly, pressing against their every gesture, word, and thought. They moved through the house carrying fragments of earlier lives, a childhood abruptly ended, a home lost to poverty or misfortune, a family who had either forgotten them or been unable to protect them. These pasts were neither elaborated nor discussed openly, but they influenced the rhythm of each day, informing decisions, moods, and reactions with a subtle insistence. Others came from more stable backgrounds, yet discovered that the life within these walls demanded a type of adaptation that rendered old habits and expectations largely irrelevant. The contrast between these trajectories was never remarked upon aloud, but the quiet difference could be sensed in how a woman held herself, in the calmness or nervousness of her approach, and in the ease with which she navigated interactions with clients and colleagues alike. Conversations among the women were often carefully measured. Humor, when it appeared, was soft, ironic, and understated. Complaints were muted, vented in whispers or with wry smiles. Advice was often coded, conveyed through a glance, a gesture, or a deliberately casual comment. This subtlety was not frivolous. It maintained the equilibrium of the house, preserving privacy, dignity, and discretion while simultaneously allowing knowledge, experience, and caution to be shared effectively. Words were never wasted, and yet, within this economy of language, meaning was dense, layered, and continuously interpreted by those attuned to nuance. The clients themselves were a study in quiet variability. Some were repeat visitors, arriving with predictable routines and gentle familiarity. Others were strangers, nervous, fumbling, or oddly formal. Each interaction required assessment, adaptation, and subtle improvisation. A sudden cough, a hesitant hand movement, a shifting gaze, all became cues for response, signaling opportunity, discomfort, or emotional need. The women interpreted these signals constantly, their perception finely tuned to minute details that might escape any casual observer. The work demanded patience, subtlety, and almost preternatural attention to patterns, repetition, and small deviations. There was, in many ways, a rhythm to each day that was unremarkable, yet essential. Tasks that might appear mundane to outsiders, laundry, sweeping, arranging furniture, tending lamps, replenishing supplies, were in fact critical elements of the ongoing equilibrium. Neglect, even minor, could ripple outward, subtly destabilizing the environment, creating discomfort or signaling inattentiveness. Mastery of this rhythm required neither extraordinary skill nor energy, merely persistent attention, observation, and the internalization of patterns over time. The emotional toll of sustained labor was subtle, cumulative, and often invisible. Long days and nights required constant attention to mood, expression, and posture. Emotions had to be managed with care, whether genuine or performative. Moments of private reflection, rarely permitted and rarely safe to prolong, were carefully carved from brief pauses, solitary walks through narrow corridors, or quiet moments by a window. Even these interludes were often occupied with observation, internal rehearsal, or planning for the next encounter. The personal inner life was both a refuge and a tool, providing continuity, self awareness, and subtle leverage in navigating an environment in which personal expression was constrained, yet never irrelevant. Within these walls, competition was quiet but persistent. Young women learned quickly which gestures, tones, and attitudes elicited approval or attention from senior colleagues. Hierarchies were nuanced, based not on age alone but on experience, skill, and social perception. The most subtle victories were often invisible. The quiet acknowledgement of competence, a knowing glance, the unspoken recognition of judgment all became currency. Social skill was continuously exercised, evaluated, and refined, blending personal temperament, observation, and intuition into a delicate but effective form of influence. Physical presentation remained a constant concern. Dresses were arranged to highlight elegance without seeming forced. Colors were chosen to suggest calm confidence. Fabrics were managed to avoid wrinkles or untimely wear, and hair was styled with both attention and restraint. Even minor errors, a loose thread, a misaligned hem, a slightly uneven braid, were noted by those trained to perceive subtlety and corrected quickly, often without overt acknowledgement. The performance of appearance was inseparable from the performance of demeanor, and both were calibrated continuously in response to environment, social cues, and anticipated interactions. Despite the routines, unpredictability persisted. Illness, injury, weather changes, or unexpected arrivals could disrupt the carefully maintained flow. Adaptation was constant, yet subtle. Adjustments were made without fanfare, without visible tension, and with a quiet sense of inevitability. The house itself seemed to absorb and normalize these fluctuations, its rhythm reasserting itself almost automatically, guided by collective experience, subtle authority, and an intimate understanding of human behavior. Conversations with clients often revealed glimpses of the world beyond the walls. Stories, confessions, jokes, or laments drifted quietly through the evening, carrying the scent of distant towns, family expectations, failed marriages, or personal regrets. The women listened attentively, filtering information, gauging trustworthiness, and adjusting engagement accordingly. These interactions demanded subtlety. Excessive empathy might encourage unwelcome familiarity, indifference could provoke offense, and misreading a subtle social cue could lead to discomfort or embarrassment. Mastery of this social landscape required ongoing attention, practice, and reflection. In quieter moments, women observed one another with the same careful attention they applied to clients. Gestures, expressions, and behaviors were noted, analyzed, and remembered. This observation was rarely judgmental, more functional, creating a mental map of skills, tendencies, and preferences that informed collaboration, conflict resolution, and mutual support. Each interaction, however brief, added to the accumulating knowledge base, allowing women to navigate social terrain with increasing confidence and precision. Even simple tasks carried layers of significance. Folding laundry, lighting lamps, adjusting curtains, or arranging furniture were exercises in both precision and psychological influence. Placement, timing, and method were adjusted to support both operational efficiency and emotional atmosphere. A misplaced candle could disrupt comfort, an untidy table could undermine confidence, and a poorly arranged chair could influence perception. Every gesture, no matter how small, carried implicit meaning and required awareness. However, an oversight in the system, a subtle miscalculation in timing or spatial arrangement could result in a breakdown, especially when crucial details like emotional labor or mentorship were disregarded. These lapses were not always obvious, but they rippled through the environment. For instance, if a routine task like folding linens, was rushed or poorly executed, it signaled a lack of attentiveness. Similarly, when staff members failed to adjust to the emotional rhythms of the team, it caused tension, making the usual quiet authority feel unstable. These disruptions, though subtle, would often cascade into larger operational failures, interrupting the silent infrastructure of the workplace. The senior staff wielded quiet authority, not through overt command, but through example, experience, and subtle guidance. Their presence was stabilizing, their interventions rarely verbalized, and their influence often unnoticed until its absence was felt. Mentorship was integrated into routine interactions, small corrections, and understated advice. This invisible leadership ensured continuity, efficiency, and cohesion, even amid the pressures, fatigue, and unpredictability inherent to the environment. Without it, however, there could be lapses, moments when procedures weren't followed as meticulously or emotional nuances went unaddressed. Emotional labor extended to managing the emotional states of colleagues. A soft word, a knowing glance, and a gentle adjustment of tone could diffuse tension, signal understanding, or prevent conflict. Humor, often ironic or understated, was deployed strategically, easing stress without attracting attention. However, when the team's emotional rhythm faltered, even these small gestures could feel out of place. It was here, in these delicate moments, that the invisible leadership of the senior staff showed most clearly. Their awareness of these shifts was paramount. Without it, the smallest crack in the system could expand, undermining trust and cohesiveness. Over time, experience transformed both perception and response. Repetition created intuition. Observation created insight. Reflection created subtle adjustments in behavior and judgment. The cumulative effect was a refined capacity for attention, management, and interaction, allowing women to function effectively within a complex, demanding, and socially intricate environment. The morning light seeped softly through the drawn curtains, a pale gray brushing across the floorboards, and the house felt different somehow after the storm. The air was cooler, carrying the faint tang of wet stone and the lingering scent of damp wood from the previous night's rain. You woke with the sensation of your own body before the world intruded, a rare and precious first recognition of self apart from duty or expectation. Lily was still asleep in the bed beside you, her steady breathing a quiet anchor in the half dark. It was one of those moments when the house itself seemed to pause, breathing slowly with you before the usual rhythms began again. You stretched carefully, the muscles stiff from yesterday's exertions, and let the familiar comfort of your own room fill the small space around you. After a few minutes of deliberate quiet, you rose and moved toward the washstand. The basin had cooled overnight, but the water from the pitcher was pleasantly tempered, just enough to rouse the senses without shock. You splashed it across your face, letting droplets trickle over your temples, each tiny movement deliberate, methodical, almost meditative. The act itself had become a small ritual, a way of marking the transition from night's private world to the day that would demand performance and attention. The brush followed next, moving through the damp strands of hair with steady patience, pulling out knots and settling curls back into a semblance of order. Even in these early hours, before the first client had arrived or Mrs. Cartwright had called her commands through the hallway, the mechanics of preparation were already an intimate dance, one you had perfected over many months. Breakfast was taken in quiet, the kitchen bright with early light, and the smell of toast and brewing tea mingled with the damp freshness that the storm had left behind. Emily was already there, slicing bread and buttering it with careful efficiency. She looked up as you entered, a small smile lighting her tired face. The two of you shared no words at first, merely moving around one another in practiced choreography, acknowledging each other with subtle nods and glances rather than conversation. There was comfort in this, the kind that arises from knowing someone else inhabits the same strange world, with the same burdens, the same routines. Lily joined shortly, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and the three of you settled into a quiet, almost domestic rhythm. Tea poured, bread buttered, small exchanges of mundane notes, weather forecasts, rumors of gentlemen about town, the condition of Mrs. Cartwright's bookkeeping served as low level companionship, a buffer against the more demanding encounters that the day would inevitably bring. The first client was expected in mid morning, a punctual gentleman of the banking world, though nothing in his attire suggested real extravagance. He was likely young enough to still imagine himself worldly, though in reality confined within the safe expectations of respectable society. Mrs. Cartwright had left specific instructions, brief and professional, her voice carrying authority without warmth. You nodded, acknowledging the unspoken message, charm, attentiveness, and discretion. All the things a professional of your craft had learned to perform with the sort of fluid ease that only comes from experience. As you moved to the parlor, the wooden floorboards cool beneath your slippers, you felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and detachment, a duality that defined so much of your life. Clients came and went, each with their own peculiarities, their own subtle demands, their own mixtures of curiosity and expectation. Some were polite, some slightly awkward, a few entirely self absorbed. And yet, in each interaction, there was a rhythm and understanding that required only small adjustments of tone, posture, and expression. You had become adept at reading these men, predicting the gentle rise and fall of their desires, the points where conversation might linger and where it must give way to physical engagement. Sleep was a brief and interrupted activity. Short intervals, naps, or quick rest periods were woven into ongoing tasks, creating a cycle of recovery that was minimal but adequate. Over time, workers became adept at finding the rest they needed within limitations, maintaining composure, alertness, and emotional balance despite fatigue. These adaptations were learned, tested, and refined, forming a foundation of resilience that supported long-term productivity. Any failure to maintain this rhythm, a moment of burnout or deep exhaustion, could disrupt the balance, causing a temporary breakdown in the process. The layout of the building promoted operational efficiency and social dynamics. Hallways guided movement, doors framed interaction, and partitions created both privacy and controlled visibility. Lighting and furniture were arranged to influence perception, comfort, and ease of movement. However, when the environment itself, through poor arrangement or lack of attention to detail, failed to meet the psychological needs of the team, the atmosphere became unsettling. Tension would rise, conversations would become more strained, and the underlying structure would begin to show signs of wear. Routine remained essential. Tasks such as laundry, cleaning, organizing, and managing spaces were not just practical. They shaped the atmosphere, reinforced social expectations, and supported operational consistency. Attention to detail, folding neatly, polishing surfaces, and adjusting linens served as silent communication, signaling competence, attentiveness, and dependability. Even small mistakes could subtly disrupt interactions, while consistency fostered trust, authority, and unity. But when this routine was interrupted, it signaled something deeper, a flaw in the system, a missed emotional cue, or a lapse in guidance. The relationship between newcomers and experienced staff was key. Guidance was embedded in daily routines, small corrections, and shared observation. Trust, discretion, and care were crucial, forming networks of support that enabled adaptation, stability, and mutual reliance. But when these relationships were neglected, when experienced staff members failed to notice small mistakes or didn't offer guidance, newcomers struggled. Trust and thus stability faltered. Visitors were varied, each encounter requiring careful attention. Some sought conversation, others preferred quiet, some needed practical help, and some needed nothing at all. The staff interpreted these intentions through gesture, tone, and subtle cues, adjusting their attention, speech, and presence accordingly. Successful interaction required observation, intuition, and patience. Mistakes were rare but valuable, reinforcing attentiveness and refining social skills. But even a small misstep, such as a wrong assumption about a visitor's needs, could have larger consequences. This morning's visitor, Mr. Cromwell, arrived with careful punctuality. He was slightly older than the banker, mid-40s, with thinning hair and the kind of faintly mottled skin that suggested a life of long office hours under dim lamplight. His hands were dry, the nails neatly kept, fingers trembling slightly as he extended one to greet you. There was a hesitancy in his eyes, a mild self-consciousness, and you noted it with quiet interest. He was the sort who would require gentle reassurance, conversation lightly sprinkled with flattery, a sense that he was participating in something civilized rather than merely transactional. Your voice remained calm, even soft yet clear, as you welcomed him, and the small smile you offered carried no urgency, merely an invitation to comfort and attentiveness. Tea was poured first, a small, carefully executed ceremony in itself. The china was familiar, worn at the edges but polished with care, and the amber liquid glowed faintly in the soft morning light. You poured with practiced precision, allowing your fingers to brush lightly against his hand as you handed him the cup, the small contact measured and deliberate, neither too much nor too little. Mr. Cromwell responded with a slight start, then a faint, relieved smile. He appreciated subtlety, and your calm, steady manner suited him. Conversation began, deliberately unhurried. You discussed the weather, the state of commerce in London, a recent performance at the theater he had attended. He spoke at length, and you listened, not merely for politeness, but to understand him, to map the contours of his expectations, his peculiarities. The transition to more intimate interaction was slow, almost imperceptible. Hands brushed across the teacup, the adjustment of a chair, the slight lean to offer closer listening. Your movements were measured, deliberate, designed to encourage, yet not overwhelm. The process was familiar, one you had perfected, reading the subtle cues, responding with calm, gentle guidance, creating a space where the client could feel both relaxed and admired, without ever confusing performance with intimacy. There was skill in this, and it required attention, patience, and a quiet knowledge of human behavior that few outside this house could ever hope to attain. When the physical aspect began, it was neither rushed nor extravagant. Mr. Cromwell was considerate, hesitant in places, appreciative in others, and you adjusted in kind, performing with a kind of detached professionalism that masked the careful calculations beneath. Even now, as you moved through gestures that might appear tender, there was an underlying mindfulness, a conscious awareness of boundaries, of time, of the gentle balance between giving and self-preservation. He lingered briefly afterward, the customary quiet conversation following the act, a polite exchange that acknowledged satisfaction without slipping into sentimentality. You noted his particular preferences, small details that would guide future encounters, mental notes filed away quietly like entries in a personal ledger. Once Mr. Cromwell departed, the parlor returned to its natural stillness. You moved through the now familiar routines, washing, straightening, arranging the small vases of flowers, adjusting the chairs and cushions, ensuring the room bore no evidence of the previous encounter. Each action was a form of quiet meditation, allowing the mind to settle, the body to release tension, and the household to reclaim a sense of neutrality. The day progressed in this measured cadence, arrivals and departures, conversations soft and unhurried, the steady rhythm of tea poured, doors opened and closed, the occasional note from Mrs. Cartwright delivering instructions with her usual economy of expression. By early afternoon, the weather had cleared, and the faint warmth of sun through the windows lent a different quality to the air. Light glinted off the polished wood, highlighting the gentle curve of a banister, the muted patterns of the carpets, the subtle arrangement of chairs and tables meant to suggest domestic comfort and understated elegance. The contrast between the sunlit calm and the previous night's storm seemed almost symbolic, a quiet acknowledgement of the duality of life within these walls, turbulence and tranquility, exertion and ease, performance and private reflection. Emily moved with silent efficiency, attending to small tasks while occasionally exchanging low murmurs of commentary with you and Lily. These moments, though brief, were significant in their quiet intimacy, a shared acknowledgement of the work, of the lives contained within these walls, of the delicate dance of maintaining appearances and managing expectations. There was a tacit understanding in these exchanges the outside world would never comprehend the careful labor, the subtle strategy, the emotional calculation that governed every interaction. Yet within this small, confined environment, the rules were known, observed, and respected. A new client arrived in mid-afternoon, a younger man, perhaps in his late 20s, with the self-assured posture of someone used to attention but inexperienced in discretion. He introduced himself with a flourish, a touch of theatricality that suggested he believed he was charming rather than merely polite. His eyes lingered a little too long, and his voice carried a slightly forced confidence, the kind that comes from rehearsal rather than ease. You noted these qualities immediately, your response measured, soft, a calm counterbalance to his overt enthusiasm. Conversation began slowly, probing gently at his interests, his tastes, his assumptions about the world beyond the drawing room. You guided him carefully, offering subtle compliments, acknowledging his observations, drawing him into the rhythms of the house without ever relinquishing control. Physical interaction followed the now familiar progression. His energy was more impatient than the previous clients, yet you managed the pace with steady hands, quiet voice, and careful attention. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture considered, balancing responsiveness with restraint. There was a rhythm, a cadence, a familiar musicality to these encounters, one that required observation, skill, and a subtle understanding of human nature. Even when he became slightly careless, the gentle corrections were sufficient to maintain balance, a quiet lesson in control delivered with discretion. After he left, the day began to descend toward evening. The parlor, once again, became a space of transition and preparation. Chairs were adjusted, flowers straightened, cushions fluffed, and the faint scent of lavender water replaced with the neutral air of readiness. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and the repetition offered a strange comfort, a meditation in motion. The hours passed quietly, the routines unfolding with the soft inevitability of tides. Conversation with the other women remained muted, punctuated by practical notes and occasional observations, the subtle humor and irony of shared experience forming an undercurrent of warmth beneath the professional exterior. Evening arrived with its own distinct atmosphere, the fading light casting long shadows across the floorboards, the flicker of candles and gas lamps lending a gentle glow to the polished surfaces and carefully arranged furnishings. The first of the late clients would arrive shortly, and the house took on its nocturnal rhythm, each movement measured, each gesture part of a larger choreography. You dressed carefully, selecting garments that would suggest elegance and approachability without extravagance, a delicate balance of impression, management, and comfort. The corset, the silk skirts, the soft shoes, all were instruments in a performance that required subtlety, skill, and endurance. And yet, even within this structured performance, there were small moments of private reflection. You considered the lives of the men who arrived, their routines, their limitations, the gentle absurdity of their self importance, the quiet pathos of their unmet desires. There was a certain satisfaction in understanding them, in observing the predictable patterns beneath the carefully constructed facades. And there was a strange intimacy in the knowledge that this understanding, this insight into human behavior, belonged solely to you and the few others who inhabited this space, creating a shared secret layer beneath the surface of polite interaction. The first evening visitor was a distinguished gentleman, older than most, with graying hair and the faint tremor of age in his hands. He moved slowly, deliberately, as though measuring each step against some internal standard. His eyes, sharp beneath the heavy lids, assessed the room, the furniture, the subtle arrangement of light and shadow before settling on you with a careful interest. The conversation was gentle, unhurried, moving through small talk into more personal reflections, and you matched his pace, offering responses that suggested attentiveness, intelligence, and mild amusement without urgency or excess. The physical interaction followed naturally, comfortably, with a quiet rhythm that required no force, no display, only presence, observation, and gentle guidance. When it ended, he lingered briefly, a hand resting on yours, and you acknowledged it with a calm, respectful smile, the simple exchange conveying understanding without attachment. Once he departed, the room was returned to order. The flowers were checked, the cushions straightened, the floor brushed lightly. Each small task was performed with methodical care, a repetition that offered both comfort and meditation. The evening continued in this manner, clients arriving and departing, each encounter slightly different, each requiring its own attention, observation, and gentle management. The subtle interplay of conversation, gesture, and presence formed the fabric of the house's life, an invisible weave of skill, patience, and understanding that was both delicate and demanding. As the night deepened, the intervals between clients lengthened, the house grew quieter, the shadows longer, and the faint scent of burning wood and flowers mingled with the lingering hints of perfume and human presence. The women gathered briefly in the kitchen, a small respite of warmth and companionship, sharing muted conversation, gentle humor, and the occasional sigh of relief. Meals were modest, tea poured, and small anecdotes exchanged, each a soft acknowledgement of shared labor, shared understanding, and the subtle solidarity that arose from living this peculiar, demanding life together. The hours passed in slow, deliberate cadence. Floors were swept, rooms aired, linens checked, and the quiet rhythms of domestic maintenance performed with calm efficiency. There was time to reflect, to note small shifts in demeanor, preferences, and reactions of those who had visited, cataloging these mental observations for future reference, a quiet record that would guide subsequent interactions. And in these intervals, the mind wandered gently, tracing patterns, considering futures both probable and impossible, reflecting on the delicate balance between necessity and desire, freedom and constraint, performance and genuine emotion. It was in the early morning, after the final visitors had departed, that the house truly breathed. The rooms were quiet, the air cool and slightly damp from night condensation, and the women, exhausted but alert, moved with practiced efficiency through the final tasks, washing, organizing, adjusting, and storing. The private beds awaited, offering the rare opportunity for unobserved rest. Clothes were removed, bodies washed, hair brushed, and the small rituals of preparation for sleep performed with deliberate care, each movement a final acknowledgement of the day's labor and the promise of brief reprieve. The bedroom you shared with Lily offered its usual solace, simple furnishings, familiar textures, the small comfort of knowing that here, in this private space, no performance was required. Sheets were drawn, pillows adjusted, and the nightdress settled around your shoulders with soft familiarity. The body relaxed, muscles yielding to gravity and fatigue, and the mind gradually released its attention from calculation and anticipation, allowing thoughts to drift gently, unstructured, unhurried, like clouds moving across a gray sky. Outside, the city murmured faintly. The distant clatter of horse hooves, the occasional shouted conversation, the subtle sigh of wind across rooftops, all formed a soft backdrop that was almost melodic in its constancy. Inside, the room was warm, quiet, and steady, the faint scent of lavender and clean linens mingling with the lingering echoes of the day's exertions. The comfort of privacy, of absence of expectation, was a subtle relief, and the body yielded fully to the deep, even rhythm of sleep, the kind that arrives slowly, insistently, enveloping every limb, every thought, every remaining tension with calm inevitability. Sleep was not abrupt but gradual, a slow descent into softness, the mind tracing familiar patterns in reverse, untangling the day's events, letting the details fade into shadow. The house itself seemed to settle around you, floors creaking faintly in the distance, lamps dimming as they burned lower, and the faint draft of air across the window offering a gentle, constant touch. Breathing deepened, slow and measured, chest rising and falling in deliberate rhythm, and the body began to forget the day entirely, save for the residual comfort of warmth and familiar surroundings. The hours passed, and in the dark quiet, fragments of thought arose like sparks in the periphery. The peculiarities of yesterday's visitors, the slight tremor in a hand, the faint flush of embarrassment, the small signs of unspoken desire. Each was catalogued and allowed to drift, noted, considered, then released, the mind performing its own private reckoning, invisible and silent. There was a subtle satisfaction in this quiet reflection, a sense of mastery over experience, a gentle reassurance that each day, each interaction, each subtle negotiation of attention and expectation was understood, managed, and survived. And yet, even in this calm, even in this carefully cultivated detachment, there lingered a small, almost imperceptible awareness of life beyond the walls, beyond the rooms, beyond the routines that structured the day, a sense of continuity, a gentle recognition that the patterns observed, the calculations performed, the performances enacted were threads in a larger tapestry of existence, a continuum of human behavior, desire, and endurance that extended far beyond the parlor and the bedrooms, beyond the familiar faces and routines. The storm had long passed. replaced by the quiet gray light of early morning, but its memory lingered in the cool dampness of the walls, in the faint smell of wet stone, in the subtle resonance of dripping water from the eaves. These were the details that you noticed now, half awake, half dreaming, as the mind drifted slowly, gently through observations, both mundane and profound. The house itself seemed to breathe along with you, expanding and contracting, alive with the echoes of yesterday and the promise of tomorrow, a steady rhythm that demanded nothing, offered everything, and carried you further into quiet reflection than any conversation, any performance, any deliberate act could hope to do. The kitchen clock chimed softly in the distance, a measured, gentle reminder of time's passage. Yet it felt irrelevant here, in this private sanctuary, where attention could drift, where thoughts could meander unhurried, where the body and mind could untangle themselves from expectation, desire, and performance. You lay still, letting the quiet accumulate, letting awareness expand to fill the empty spaces, noticing the way the air felt against skin, the subtle movement of shadows across the walls, the faint creaking of floorboards in rooms far below. Even the sound of breathing, your own and Lily's, became a part of this quiet rhythm, a soft percussion marking the gentle continuity of life within the walls. There was a strange comfort in this, the recognition that while the world outside might impose its demands within these spaces, time flowed differently, slower, softer, and entirely within your control. And as consciousness softened further, edges of thought blurring, the mind allowed itself the strange luxury of contemplation, of past clients, of yesterday's events, of small victories, mistakes, or unnoticed kindnesses exchanged in passing, all catalogued in a quiet ledger of awareness that existed solely for you. And so the day's work and night's reflection dissolved into one another, a seamless continuum of movement, observation, and reflection, the body resting in the security of familiarity, the mind slowly letting its tension melt gradually into the soft quiet of the room. You traced in thought the subtle variations of each client, the tiny gestures that had betrayed more than words ever could, the faint flush of embarrassment or anticipation that was always so fleeting, yet so revealing. It was not a cruel observation, nor one born of vanity, but a professional mindfulness, a quiet cataloging of human behavior in a space removed from pretense. The women around you shared this skill, though each in her own way. Emily with her quiet pragmatism, Lily with her soft perceptiveness, Mrs. Cartwright with her sharp, almost surgical judgment, able to read a new visitor as one reads the weather, forecasting disturbances, patterns, and potential inconveniences with uncanny precision. Morning returned again in its pale, diffused light. You awoke slowly, the body still tender from yesterday's exertions, the mind already tracing the contours of the day ahead. There was no rush, only the soft cadence of preparation, the quiet unfolding of routine. Breakfast followed the now familiar rituals. Tea poured with care, bread sliced and buttered with attention, small murmured exchanges threading through the silence, bridging companionship with the calm acknowledgement of duty. The days in this house were not filled with drama, not in any immediate, explosive sense. Rather, they were made of layered, repetitive actions, each demanding attentiveness, precision, and emotional labor that could be exhausting in its subtlety. A new client arrived mid-morning, a man of slight build, perhaps in his early 30s, dressed in the restrained austerity of a clerk who had glimpsed society but not yet fully integrated into its expectations. His eyes were sharp, quick-moving, scanning the room with a hint of apprehension. You noted the tension immediately, a subtle tightness of jaw, a faint raising of eyebrows that betrayed uncertainty, masked by overcompensation. The approach, therefore, required softness, modulation, gentle humor that could release tension without condescension, a delicate balance of friendliness and professional detachment. Tea was poured in silence, the routine itself a comfort. The cups, the small saucers, the steam rising gently from liquid amber, all created a calm framework within which conversation could unfold naturally. You observed him as he spoke of minor grievances from his office, of slight disappointments with colleagues, of the trivialities that mattered most in a world built on routines and hierarchies. Each word, each pause, each gesture was a data point, quietly stored for future reference, a mental map that would guide subtle adjustments during the afternoon interactions. By the time physical intimacy arrived, it was soft, unhurried, a quiet dance rather than a spectacle. He followed cues you offered with gentle precision, the natural rhythm guided by careful timing, light touches, and subtle adjustments. No force was necessary, no exaggerated display required. The act was measured, a calm exchange in which attention and care were more significant than any overt action. Observing him, you noted the relief that replaced tension, the relaxation that followed attentiveness, the faint admiration in his eyes that was less about you and more about the rare kindness shown to him in a controlled environment. After he departed, the parlor regained its neutral air. Cushions were fluffed, flowers rearranged, tables wiped clean, and the faint scent of tea and lavender restored to its baseline. The women moved through the house like clockwork, efficient, unobtrusive, their private conversations a low murmur under the overarching silence. Each small act of preparation, each mundane gesture was part of a larger ecosystem of order and calm that underpinned the house's operations. It was this continuous, invisible labor that maintained the delicate equilibrium of a space where the boundary between service and personal life was always tenuous and carefully negotiated. The afternoon's clients brought their own nuances. One gentleman, older, with a slightly florid complexion and hands prone to tremor, required extra patience, his movements uncertain, the mind racing ahead of his own body. His conversation wandered among topics that ranged from mundane details of finance to faintly absurd reflections on morality, each statement a mix of genuine curiosity and socially rehearsed etiquette. Your responses were measured, gentle, allowing him to feel acknowledged without yielding to imposition. This subtle control was not authoritarian, but protective, guiding the experience with understated skill that preserved dignity on both sides of the interaction. Between clients, you allowed brief moments of private reflection. The quiet hours offered time to consider, not with judgment but with observation, the subtle patterns of human behavior, the predictable eccentricities, and the fleeting vulnerabilities. Lily's presence was comforting, the occasional soft word or glance confirming solidarity without intrusion. Emily's pragmatism, so practical and efficient, provided a contrast that emphasized the delicate artistry of emotional navigation required in the parlor. Mrs. Cartwright's watchful eyes remained a constant reminder that every detail mattered, that order was as much a moral imperative as a practical necessity. As evening approached, the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. The light softened, shadows lengthened, and the subtle play of candlelight against polished wood created a warmer, more intimate ambiance. Clients arrived with expectations tuned to this hour, a touch of ceremony, a hint of performance, a gentle indulgence in fantasy that the women were trained to modulate without overstepping. Their movements were more deliberate, their speech more measured, a natural slowing that mirrored the day's gradual decline. Your own pace adjusted, maintaining calm attentiveness while allowing the environment itself to relax into its nocturnal rhythm. The first evening visitor was a gentleman of quiet affluence, older, with distinguished manners and a faint air of melancholy. He moved with deliberate grace, his eyes scanning the room with faintly wistful attention. Conversation unfolded slowly, punctuated by subtle gestures, delicate attentiveness, and soft laughter. The physical component followed naturally, guided by the rhythm of mutual comfort and observation rather than any overt urgency. You noted his hesitations, his fleeting self consciousness, the faint relief that accompanied attentive guidance, and stored each detail in a mental catalog that had become an essential aspect of professional practice. Subsequent clients in the later hours were diverse. A young man newly aware of the freedoms he could purchase, a mid aged clerk seeking distraction from monotony, a gentleman of considerable age craving nostalgia and quiet reminiscence. Each required a slightly different approach, a gentle recalibration of tone, timing, and attentiveness. The subtle artistry lay not in flamboyant gestures, but in the accumulation of small, deliberate acts that created a sense of security, comfort, and acknowledgement. There was humor to be found, too, in the predictability of human desire, the quiet absurdity of certain expectations, and the unspoken acknowledgement that each visitor's self importance existed largely in a bubble carefully managed within these walls. After the last visitor departed, the house descended into a softer, quieter state. Tasks of restoration commenced, floors brushed, linens adjusted, cushions straightened, flowers refreshed, rooms aired. Each movement was deliberate, a ritualized cleansing that prepared the environment for rest, reflection, and private recuperation. The women moved efficiently, the quiet murmur of exchange punctuated by gentle laughter, dry humor, and small observations, the shared experience of laboring in a space simultaneously intimate and professional. The night deepened, and the house settled into its final rhythm. Beds were prepared, garments removed, the body cleaned and soothed, hair brushed with care, small personal rituals observed before surrendering to sleep. The air was cool, scented faintly with lavender and worn wood, carrying a sense of security that allowed the mind to release attention and anticipation gradually. Breathing deepened, slow and steady, as limbs relaxed and consciousness eased into the soft contours of slumber. Even within sleep, fragments of observation lingered. The details of previous interactions surfaced in muted clarity. A nervous glance, a hesitant hand, a faint flush of embarrassment, or the subtle twitch of a smile. Each was catalogued without judgment, absorbed into the quiet ledger of professional experience, then released to the background hum of unconscious reflection. The house itself seemed to join in this quiet rhythm, floors creaking faintly, lamps dimming, windows allowing the soft stirrings of air to move gently across surfaces, and the women in their private spaces shared this calm, mutual acknowledgement of endurance, skill, and subtle mastery. By the faint light of early morning, after hours of restorative rest, consciousness returned in measured increments. The body stretched, muscles yielding to gravity and the softness of bedclothes, while the mind began its own gentle calibration of expectation and observation. Breakfast routines began, faint sounds of preparation echoing through hallways, tea poured and bread buttered, subtle conversation threading through quiet companionship. The repetition of these actions created continuity, a subtle reassurance that the house's rhythms were intact, that the labor and observation of yesterday were preserved in practice and memory. Morning visitors arrived in slow succession, each with their own peculiarities, preferences, and vulnerabilities. The pace remained deliberate, the responses gentle, the observation acute. Small moments of humor punctuated the quiet professionalism, a misplaced word, an overly formal gesture, the incongruity of self importance tempered by human fragility. These small ironies were noted, sometimes gently acknowledged, sometimes simply absorbed into the quiet mental record of human behavior that each day reinforced. Throughout the day, the women maintained the balance between performance and private reflection. Emily's pragmatism ensured efficiency. Lily's quiet attentiveness offered subtle support. Mrs. Cartwright's watchfulness preserved order. You, moving among them, observed, guided, and adjusted the rhythm of motion, conversation, and intimacy, forming an unbroken thread of careful orchestration. The house itself became a character, an active participant in these hours. Rooms filled with light or shadow, floors creaking under careful steps, air tinged with flowers, tea, and human presence, all combining to create an environment in which subtlety and attentiveness were not merely useful but necessary. As evening returned, the cyclical pattern repeated. The soft golden light filtered through windows, shadows lengthened, and candlelight added warmth to polished surfaces. Visitors arrived with expectations tailored to the hour. Subtlety, attentiveness, indulgence, and quiet discretion. You adjusted the pace, modulated tone, and responded to each individual's peculiarities with measured care. The physical aspect of engagement, always guided by observation and patience, followed with quiet inevitability, each gesture deliberate, each movement contributing to a rhythm of mutual comfort, reassurance, and professionalism. The last client departed late into the night. The house regained silence once more, punctuated only by the gentle stirrings of air and faint creaks of structure settling. The women moved through restorative routines, linens checked, rooms aired, floors brushed, and personal hygiene attended to. The evening's labor dissolved into private reflection, each woman tracing the subtle movements of the day, cataloging interactions, noting vulnerabilities and behaviors, storing insights that would guide the next day's work. In the quiet of shared rooms, sleep approached like a gentle tide. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed and arranged, small personal rituals concluded, and the mind began its gradual retreat from attention, calculation, and observation. Breathing deepened, slow and even, limbs released tension, and consciousness softened into the contours of rest. The house itself seemed to exhale with the women, a subtle acknowledgement of the day's work, its quiet mastery, and the enduring equilibrium maintained within its walls. Sleep carried its own reflections, a muted processing of observation, subtle humor, and a gentle, persistent awareness of human frailty and desire. The patterns of yesterday and today mingled, faint traces of gestures, phrases, and glances intertwining with dreams and memory, the mind negotiating the continuum between public performance and private reflection. Even in rest, there was observation, cataloging, subtle interpretation, the quiet, ongoing labor of understanding human nature within a confined, highly structured, and deeply intimate environment. The house, resting in the early gray light, seemed almost to breathe along with the women. Air moved gently through rooms, windows rattled faintly with wind, lamps burned low, and the subtle scent of flowers, tea, and human presence lingered. In this quiet, the intricate balance of work, observation, performance, and reflection maintained itself with understated elegance. A continuous, unbroken rhythm that demanded neither applause nor acknowledgement, only attentiveness and care. Morning returned, soft and diffused, marking the beginning of another cycle. The women stirred, ritualized preparation resumed, breakfast was served with quiet efficiency, and the house slowly reanimated with the familiar cadence of measured movement, gentle conversation, and observation. Each day, each hour, each encounter became a thread in the ongoing fabric of practice, a continuous, subtle interplay of human behavior, attention, and careful management that defined life within these walls. Clients arrived with expectations shaped by social norms, personal peculiarities, and fleeting desires. The women adjusted, modulated, and observed, performing an intricate balance of attentiveness, calm, and subtle humor that preserved dignity and comfort for all involved. Physical interaction, when it occurred, was guided by observation, patience, and deliberate gestures, each movement calibrated to the client's temperament, body, and emotional state. Small insights accumulated, mental records formed, and the quiet artistry of professional engagement unfolded continuously without need for embellishment or overt display. The day progressed with gentle regularity, punctuated by small ironies and understated humor. A slight tremor of hand, an awkwardly phrased compliment, the incongruity of self importance against human vulnerability, each noted without judgment, stored quietly, and occasionally shared with the women in private acknowledgement. The subtle interplay of social performance and private awareness created a rhythm that was at once exhausting and sustaining, a continuum of attentiveness and skill that shaped every moment of existence within the house. Evening descended once again, softening light, lengthening shadows, and altering the rhythm of visitors and expectations. The women prepared with practiced care, adjusting attire, modulating speech, and attending to the quiet nuances of presence and attention. Each encounter unfolded with deliberate pacing, guided by observation, patience, and subtle understanding of human desire, each action measured, each gesture deliberate, maintaining the delicate balance between comfort, reassurance, and professional detachment. After the final visitor departed, restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, cushions and linens adjusted, and personal hygiene attended to. Reflection followed, quiet cataloging of gestures, observations, and vulnerabilities, each woman noting the intricacies of the day's labor with subtle, unspoken acknowledgement. Shared glances and murmured commentary underscored the collective awareness of endurance, skill, and quiet mastery that defined existence within these walls. The night deepened, and the women retired to their private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, the faint scent of lavender and warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, and consciousness softened, yielding to the gentle rhythm of sleep. Even here, fragments of observation persisted, muted and gentle. Fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, the quiet absurdity and charm of human behavior catalogued without judgment, a continuous, delicate record of experience preserved in mind and memory. The house itself seemed to exhale, resting in concert with its inhabitants. Floors creaked faintly, lamps dimmed to embers, air stirred softly through the windows, and the quiet rhythm of life, performance, observation, and reflection maintained itself with understated continuity. In this, there was a sense of mastery, a soft acknowledgement that while the world beyond imposed expectation and desire, within these walls, the continuum of attentive presence and subtle artistry persisted without pause. Dawn approached with the same quiet inevitability as every morning. Light filtered through curtains, soft and diffused, marking the return of ritualized preparation, breakfast, and the slow, deliberate reanimation of the house. Each day, repetition and variation intertwined, patterns observed, gestures catalogued, humor and irony quietly acknowledged, and human desire navigated with subtle, persistent skill. And so the days continued, an unbroken cycle of observation, performance, reflection, and rest. The women moving with calm efficiency through tasks, conversation, and intimacy. The house, alive with its own rhythms, participated in this continuum, offering structure, stability, and quiet continuity. Within these walls, time flowed differently, slower, gentler, and intimately tied to attention, care, and the continuous management of human behavior and expectation. The afternoons passed with the same measured cadence, visitors arriving and departing, the interplay of attentiveness, subtle humor, and quiet observation maintained. Moments of reflection punctuated the routines, offering insight, reassurance, and continuity. The women's skills, social, emotional, and practical, remained finely tuned. The delicate balance of professional engagement and personal preservation preserved across hours, days, and weeks. Evening fell with gentle inevitability. The soft light of candle and lamp mingled with the last vestiges of daylight, creating a warm, intimate ambiance. Visitors arrived with expectations attuned to this hour, careful attentiveness, indulgence in subtle fantasy, quiet discretion. The women responded with measured skill, calibrating tone, gesture, and presence to match each visitor's temperament and desire. Physical interaction followed naturally, guided by patient observation and subtle adjustments, maintaining comfort, reassurance, and professional detachment. Once the last visitor departed, restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, and personal hygiene attended to. Reflection followed, cataloging observations, gestures, and vulnerabilities, creating a subtle ledger of understanding preserved in mind and memory. Shared glances and murmured commentary reinforced collective awareness, emphasizing endurance, skill, and mastery inherent in the daily life of the house. The night deepened, and the women retired to their private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, scents of lavender and warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, and consciousness softened into the gentle rhythm of sleep. Even in rest, fragments of observation persisted, fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, the quiet absurdity and charm of human behavior catalogued without judgment, forming an ongoing, delicate record of experience preserved within the mind. And so the cycle continued, day after day, week after week, each iteration subtly different, yet bound by the unbroken rhythms of attentiveness, observation, performance, and reflection. The house itself, alive with its own quiet patterns, supported this continuum, providing structure, stability, and gentle continuity to the lives of the women within. Within these walls, time moved slowly, attentively, intimately. The continuum of human behavior, desire, and skill maintained without need for recognition or applause, sustained purely by quiet presence, deliberate action, and subtle mastery. Morning light returned softly, the diffused gray and pale gold filtering through lace curtains, brushing the polished wood and patterned wallpaper with a gentle warmth. The house stirred slowly. Cushions were adjusted, flowers arranged, tables wiped clean. The quiet clatter of dishes, the faint hiss of boiling water, and the soft rustle of garments moving through hallways marked the rhythm of waking. Breakfast was unhurried. Tea poured, bread buttered, marmalade spread with care. Conversations were minimal, composed mostly of murmurs and polite observations. Each movement was deliberate, each sound calibrated to maintain calm. The women moved in a practiced choreography. Emily efficient and precise, Lily gentle and attentive. Mrs. Cartwright scanning everything with hawk-like focus, ready to intervene before disorder could emerge. The first visitor arrived around mid-morning, a man of unremarkable appearance, yet notable nervousness, a clerk or minor bureaucrat who had glimpsed social privilege but never felt fully integrated into it. His eyes flitted across the room, scanning faces and fixtures with a subtle anxiety. Such individuals required a careful balance, reassurance without condescension, attentiveness without exaggeration. Conversation began lightly, topics chosen for their banality yet layered with hidden opportunities for observation. His hands, slightly trembling, betrayed his internal state. The tilt of his head, the slight flush along his cheeks, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes when uncertain or catalogued carefully. Tea arrived, poured into delicate china cups, the aroma rising and filling the room with calm familiarity. Conversation unfolded slowly, the clerk recounting minor office irritations, social missteps, and insignificant victories. You responded with measured attentiveness, lightly dry humor, gentle acknowledgement of his anxieties. Each word, each pause, each subtle gesture was a mental note, stored for future reference. The house had its own rhythm, one that absorbed and tempered the visitor's emotional volatility, and by the time the physical component of the encounter began, his tension had softened to a manageable, even pleasurable state. The physical interaction was methodical, not urgent, guided by observation, intuition, and subtle cues. No flamboyant gestures were necessary. The artistry lay in timing, softness, and attention. A brush of the hand, a turn of the head, a tilt of the body, each small adjustment conveyed reassurance, trust, and the delicate artistry of intimacy as practiced within these walls. He exhaled quietly, a gentle release, and you observed the transformation with neither judgment nor pride, only the recognition that human behavior could be remarkably malleable when gently guided. Once he departed, the house reclaimed its neutrality, cushions straightened, flowers realigned, floors brushed, the faint scent of tea and lavender lingering in the air. Small murmured conversations emerged between the women, sharing private observations, soft jokes, and occasional ironies about the absurdity of human pride and pretense. There was camaraderie here, quiet and understated, born of shared labor, observation, and the subtle negotiation of emotional territory. Afternoon visitors arrived in succession, each with its own peculiarities. One, older, florid, slightly tremulous, required patience, the careful modulation of speech and touch to guide him gently through embarrassment and desire. Another, younger, newly liberated in financial and social terms, carried an unpracticed confidence, sometimes overcompensating in gesture and word. Each interaction demanded recalibration, adjusting tone, stance, timing, and small physical gestures to maintain equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. The humor was subtle, often dry, hidden in the incongruities of expectation and human folly, acknowledged with a quiet glance or a soft murmur rather than overt laughter. Between visitors, Moments of reflection offered the women respite. The quiet hours permitted mental cataloging. Which client had hesitated in certain ways, which responded most to verbal cues, which needed more patience in touch or conversation. This practice, unspoken yet continuous, refined the artistry of their labor. Lily's gentle insight, Emily's practical precision, and Mrs. Cartwright's vigilant oversight combined into an efficient system of subtle mastery that maintained the house's equilibrium. Evening approached, softening light and extending shadows, inviting a shift in visitor expectations. The warm glow of candlelight mingled with the fading natural light, creating an ambiance conducive to reflection, indulgence, and careful emotional management. Clients now arrived attuned to this environment, seeking subtle performance, attentiveness, and controlled fantasy. The pace slowed naturally, gestures and conversation measured, and physical intimacy guided with deliberate calm. Subtle adjustments, slight tilts of the head, gentle hand placements, nuanced tone shifts facilitated relaxation, comfort, and a quiet mutual understanding that no overt drama was necessary for satisfaction. A distinguished gentleman, gray at the temples, arrived with quiet formality. He spoke in muted tones of bygone pleasures, minor regrets, and ephemeral triumphs. Conversation was slow, contemplative, each statement balanced with pauses that allowed observation and adjustment. The physical interaction followed with soft inevitability, guided by subtle rhythm and gentle attentiveness. He released tension gradually, eyes occasionally betraying the faintest hint of nostalgia or self consciousness. Your role, carefully calibrated, ensured comfort and calm, demonstrating the quiet mastery of influence without overt assertion. Subsequent visitors varied widely. A young man overestimating his sophistication, an older bureaucrat seeking distraction, a gentleman of considerable age craving the illusion of youth and attention. Each required unique modulation of attention, tone, and physical engagement. Observing these differences, cataloging subtle gestures, and responding with patient adaptability formed the invisible art of the house's labor. Humor occasionally appeared in muted irony, the awkward flourish, the timid compliment, the incongruity of self importance, but always subdued, acknowledged with gentle glances or soft murmurs rather than overt reaction. When the last visitor departed, restorative routines commenced. Floors were brushed, rooms aired, cushions and linens realigned, small personal hygiene tasks attended to. Reflection followed, subtle cataloging of observations, noting gestures, vulnerabilities, and behaviors. Private moments of shared understanding arose among the women. A brief look, a murmured comment, a small smile acknowledging the cumulative skill, endurance, and subtle mastery required to maintain the house's delicate equilibrium. Night deepened. Beds were prepared, garments removed, hair brushed and arranged, the faint scent of lavender and warmth enveloping each private space. Consciousness softened into the gentle rhythm of sleep, muscles relaxing, breathing slowing, and thoughts dissolving into quiet reflection. Even in rest, observation persisted in muted form. The fleeting expressions, small gestures, quiet absurdities, and human vulnerabilities catalogued without judgment, contributing to an ongoing record of experience internalized and preserved. Morning light returned as before, pale and diffused. Brushing the familiar surfaces with gentle warmth, routine resumed. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. The cycle of preparation, attention, observation, and interaction recommenced with measured care. Visitors arrived, expectations calibrated to their social conditioning, desires, and idiosyncrasies. The women responded, modulating tone, gesture, and physical attention to guide each individual through calm engagement, maintaining equilibrium, comfort, and dignity. The rhythm of the house persisted. Afternoon and evening visitors, subtle variations in behavior, careful observation, humor tucked into quiet ironies, the delicate management of desire and attention. Each day, the women refined their practice, learning and observing, cataloging gestures, responses, and subtle social cues. The house itself, alive with light, scent, and sound, acted as an active participant, reinforcing calm, structure, and continuity. Evening fell, shadows deepened, candlelight warmed the rooms. Visitors arrived with expectations of attentiveness, discretion, and indulgence. Conversation and physical interaction flowed with measured pacing, guided by observation and intuition. Humor appeared in subtle incongruities, a misplaced word, a hesitant gesture, a faintly absurd statement of self importance, acknowledged quietly, often with shared glances among the women. Each interaction, though private and intimate, was also a subtle rehearsal in emotional management and human understanding. When the last client departed, the house returned to stillness. Floors were brushed, linen straightened, rooms aired, personal hygiene observed. Reflection followed, cataloging gestures, quirks, and subtleties, each woman quietly noting observations that would inform the next day's practice. The shared experience of labor, observation, and subtle artistry created a quiet camaraderie, unspoken yet pervasive, sustaining the house's equilibrium. Night deepened further, and the women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, the faint aroma of lavender and warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, consciousness softened, muscles relaxed, and sleep claimed the mind. Even in rest, fragments of observation persisted. Gestures, expressions, subtle absurdities, and human vulnerabilities catalogued quietly, preserved in the mind, contributing to an ongoing understanding of human behavior, desire, and social nuance. Dawn arrived softly, returning light and subtle warmth. The house stirred, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with unique expectations shaped by social position, personal temperament, and fleeting desires. The women adjusted their tone, presence, and movements accordingly, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. The day unfolded with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Mid-morning and afternoon visitors, careful observation, subtle humor, nuanced physical engagement, private moments offered reflection, cataloging of gestures and behaviors, and small interactions among the women, reinforcing continuity, skill, and the quiet mastery required for the house's operation. Evening approached, casting shadows in bathing rooms in a soft, golden glow. Visitors arrived attuned to this hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. The women guided each encounter with measured presence, carefully observing and responding to gestures, tone, and demeanor. Subtle humor surfaced occasionally as incongruities and human quirks were noticed, shared silently, or marked in memory. Restorative routines followed the final visitor's departure. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended to. Reflection resumed, cataloging observations, quirks, and gestures, maintaining a quiet ledger of experience. Shared acknowledgement of endurance, subtle skill, and mastery threaded through small glances, murmured remarks, and gentle smiles. Night settled fully. The women retired, sheets embracing tired bodies, hair brushed and settled. Sleep descended gently, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation continued quietly in rest. Fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, human absurdities, and vulnerabilities preserved, forming a continuous, delicate record of experience. Morning light, as always, returned slowly. The familiar rhythm resumed, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with unique expectations and subtle quirks. The women guided each encounter with measured presence, attention, and skill, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed with measured cadence. Visitors observed, subtle humor and irony noted, physical engagement guided by patient observation. Private reflection allowed cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and reactions, refining practice, understanding, and anticipation. Evening brought long shadows and warm candlelight. Visitors arrived expecting attentiveness, subtle indulgence, and quiet discretion. Engagement flowed with deliberate pacing, guided by observation and intuition. Humor arose subtly in small ironies, awkward gestures, and fleeting incongruities, acknowledged quietly. The last client departed. The house settled into silence. Restorative routines, floors brushed, linen straightened, rooms aired, personal hygiene attended to. Reflection cataloged observations, quirks, and gestures. Shared acknowledgement of endurance, skill, and subtle mastery was conveyed through small glances, murmured remarks, and gentle smiles. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted quietly in sleep. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities recorded in the mind, forming a continuous understanding of human behavior, desire, and social nuance. Dawn, pale and diffused, returned. The cycle resumed. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing unique expectations, habits, and quirks. The women adjusted tone, presence, and gestures, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons were slow and deliberate. Midday visitors, careful observation, subtle humor, nuanced engagement. Private reflection offered cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and reactions. Evening fell, light softening, shadows lengthening. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, quiet fantasy, gentle attentiveness. The women responded with measured presence, observation, and subtle humor, sustaining comfort and equilibrium. After the last visitor departed, restorative routines resumed. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended to. Reflection followed, cataloging subtle gestures, quirks, and patterns. Shared acknowledgement of endurance, subtle skill, and mastery threaded through quiet interactions. Night deepened. The women retired, sheets embracing tired bodies, hair brushed, warmth lingering. Sleep descended gently, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted in muted form, fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, quirks, and human vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous, delicate record of experience. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with individual expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate presence, attentiveness, and subtle humor, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly, visitors attended to with careful observation, humor acknowledged subtly, physical engagement guided by patient calibration. Reflection and cataloging continued, refining skill, understanding, and anticipation. Evening brought shadows and candlelight. Visitors arrived, seeking calm, indulgence, quiet fantasy, and gentle attentiveness. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation and intuition. Humor surfaced in muted ironies, subtle gestures, and fleeting absurdities, acknowledged quietly. The last client departed, and restorative routines resumed. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged observations, quirks, and gestures, reinforcing continuity and mastery. Night deepened. The women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled. Sleep descended gently, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities recorded, forming an ongoing understanding of human behavior and social nuance. Dawn returned slowly, diffused pale light brushing the familiar surfaces, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons continued with slow cadence, midday visitors, careful observation, subtle humor, nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and reactions refined practice and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight warmed the rooms. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, expecting attentiveness, subtle indulgence, and quiet discretion. Engagement flowed with measured pacing, guided by observation and intuition, subtle humor appearing in small incongruities and fleeting gestures acknowledged quietly. The last client departed. Restorative routines began. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection followed, cataloging subtle gestures, quirks, and patterns, reinforcing continuous understanding and quiet mastery. Night deepened. The women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted gently in muted form. Fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, quirks, and human vulnerabilities recorded quietly in memory, forming a continuous, delicate ledger of experience. Morning arrived pale and diffuse, the familiar rhythm returning, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with expectations nuanced by temperament and habit. The women adjusted tone, gestures, and presence, sustaining comfort, professional detachment, and subtle humor. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended to with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection allowed cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and reactions, refining skill and anticipation. Evening brought shadows, candlelight, and the soft warmth of lamps. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm, indulgence, and quiet attention. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation and subtle intuition. Humor surfaced in quiet ironies, gestures, and fleeting incongruities, acknowledged softly. The last visitor departed, and restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection followed, cataloging subtle gestures, quirks, and behaviors, reinforcing the quiet mastery inherent in the house. Night deepened, women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation continued subtly in sleep, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities preserved in quiet mental record, contributing to a continuous understanding of human behavior and the nuanced interplay of desire, attention, and social expectation. Dawn returned gently, pale light filtering through curtains, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded in measured cadence. Visitors engaged with patient observation, subtle humor, and nuanced physical and conversational attention. Reflection and cataloging continued, refining practice and anticipating responses. Evening cast long shadows, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation and intuition. Humor emerged quietly in incongruities, awkward gestures, or fleeting absurdities, acknowledged gently, silently, or through shared understanding. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and quiet mastery. Night deepened fully. The women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved in memory, contributing to a continuous understanding of human behavior, desire, and social nuance. Morning returned softly, pale, light brushing familiar surfaces, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with unique expectations and behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed in slow cadence. Midday visitors attended to with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice and anticipation, the continuous ledger of experience growing incrementally, quietly. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight warmed the rooms. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, expecting attentiveness, subtle indulgence, and quiet discretion. Engagement flowed with deliberate pacing, guided by observation, intuition, and subtle humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged subtle gestures, quirks, and behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and quiet mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities recorded quietly, forming an ongoing understanding of human behavior, desire, and the nuanced practice of careful attentiveness within the house. Dawn returned, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, expectations nuanced by temperament and habit. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors engaged with careful observation, subtle humor, and deliberate attention to physical and conversational cues. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening brought long shadows, soft candlelight. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last visitor departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity and skill. Night deepened fully. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted quietly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities cataloged, forming a continuous ledger of understanding, subtle mastery, and attentive presence that defined life within the house. Morning arrived once again, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with unique expectations and behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors engaged, subtle humor acknowledged, observation maintained. Reflection and cataloging, refined skill, anticipation, and understanding. Evening cast long shadows, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and quiet attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and gentle humor. The last client departed. Floors were brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and behaviors, reinforcing continuous understanding and quiet mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities preserved in memory, forming an ongoing record of human behavior and nuanced attention. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with unique expectations and behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended to with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection allowed cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and reactions, refining practice and anticipation. Evening brought shadows, warm candlelight. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last visitor departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged subtle gestures, quirks, and behaviors, reinforcing continuity and skill. Night deepened, women retired, sheets embracing tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly recorded, forming a continuous ledge of understanding, subtle mastery, and attentive presence that defined life within the house. Dawn returned once more, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived with unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded in slow cadence. Visitors engaged with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced attention. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation, the continuous ledger of experience growing quietly, incrementally, and persistently. Evening fell, casting long shadows and bathing rooms in warm candlelight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting attentiveness, subtle indulgence, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill, quiet mastery, and attentive presence. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled. Warmth lingering. Breathing slowed. Muscles relaxed. Consciousness softened. Observation persisted quietly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities recorded, forming an ongoing, subtle understanding of human behavior, desire, and social nuance within the house. Morning returned softly, pale, and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors engaged with careful observation, subtle humor, and deliberate physical and conversational attention. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening brought long shadows, warm candlelight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity and skill. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies. Hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming an ongoing understanding of human behavior, desire, and nuanced attentiveness that defined the daily existence of the house. Dawn returned once again, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended to with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight warmed the rooms. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill, subtle mastery, and attentive presence. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled. Warmth lingering. Breathing slowed. Muscles relaxed. Consciousness softened. Observation persisted quietly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities preserved in memory, forming a continuous ledger of human behavior, subtle attentiveness, and ongoing skill within the house. Morning returned, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging, refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, long shadows stretching across the rooms, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened fully. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled. Warmth lingering. Breathing slowed. Muscles relaxed. Consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly in muted form. Fleeting gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities preserved, forming a continuous, delicate ledger of understanding human behavior and the nuanced practice of attentive presence within the house. Morning light returned softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging, refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthening, candlelight warm and soft. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged, gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled. Warmth lingering. Breathing slowed. Muscles relaxed. Consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior and social nuance within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors engaged with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured attention. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, long shadows stretching across rooms, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled. Warmth lingering. Breathing slowed. Muscles relaxed. Consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming an ongoing, delicate ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Dawn returned, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging, refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthening, candlelight warm and soft. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Floors were brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled. Warmth lingering. Breathing slowed. Muscles relaxed. Consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior and social nuance within the house. Morning light returned once more, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each with unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly, visitors engaged with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced attention. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed, restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior and nuanced social interaction within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing unique expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded in slow cadence. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation, the continuous ledger of experience growing quietly, incrementally, and persistently. Evening fell, casting long shadows and bathing rooms in warm candlelight. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, expecting attentiveness, subtle indulgence, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed deliberately, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed, floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened fully. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. Hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted quietly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities preserved in memory, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and reactions continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, long shadows stretching across rooms, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened, observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming an ongoing, delicate ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning light returns softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthening, candlelight warm and soft. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior and nuanced social interaction within the house. Dawn returned once more, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingled with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill, subtle mastery, and attentive presence. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies. hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened, observation persisted quietly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities preserved in memory, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning arrived softly, pale and diffused, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthening, candlelight warm and soft. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming an ongoing, delicate ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior and social interaction within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingled with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning light returned softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging, refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed, restorative routines recommenced, floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged, gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm, indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming an ongoing, delicate ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior and social interaction within the house. Morning returned softly, pale, and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuous skill and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering. Breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened, observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning light returned softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired to private spaces. Sheets embraced tired bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning returned softly, pale, and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Dawn returned, pale and diffused. brushing familiar surfaces, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging, refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning light returned softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced, floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened, women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused, cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced, floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines commenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened, women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened, observation persisted subtly, gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning light returned softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed. Restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged, gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and nuanced understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning returned softly, pale and diffused. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons passed slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and measured engagement. Reflection and cataloging of gestures, behaviors, and responses continued, refining practice, anticipation, and understanding. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, seeking calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed, restorative routines commenced, floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended, reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened. Women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened, observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. Morning light returned softly, pale and diffused, brushing familiar surfaces. Cushions adjusted, flowers arranged, tea poured, bread buttered, conversations murmured. Visitors arrived, each bringing distinct expectations and subtle behaviors. The women guided each encounter with deliberate attentiveness, sustaining comfort, equilibrium, and professional detachment. Afternoons unfolded slowly. Visitors attended with careful observation, subtle humor, and nuanced engagement. Reflection and cataloging refined practice, memory, and anticipation. Evening fell, shadows lengthened, candlelight mingling with fading daylight. Visitors arrived, attuned to the hour, expecting calm indulgence, subtle fantasy, and gentle attention. Engagement flowed with deliberate care, guided by observation, subtle intuition, and quiet humor. The last client departed, restorative routines recommenced. Floors brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, personal hygiene attended. Reflection cataloged gestures, quirks, and subtle behaviors, reinforcing continuity, skill, and subtle mastery. Night deepened, women retired, sheets embracing weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened, observation persisted subtly. Gestures, expressions, quirks, and vulnerabilities quietly preserved, forming a continuous ledger of attentive presence, subtle mastery, and ongoing understanding of human behavior within the house. The moon rose pale and distant, spilling silver across the worn wooden floors. In the quiet, the women reflected not merely on the day's visitors, their movements, and their words, but on themselves. The discipline required to maintain composure, the patience to observe without intrusion, and the resilience needed to inhabit a world of delicate illusions and careful attentiveness. Each repetition of the day had built upon the last layering experience, memory, and subtle wisdom. It was a wisdom of endurance as much as of craft. The house itself seemed to breathe with them, the walls absorbing echoes of conversations, laughter, sighs, and whispered confidences. Every fixture, from the aged oak beams to the polished floorboards, bore the quiet imprint of countless days lived within its rooms. Candles burned low, their scent mingling with the aroma of herbs and old wood, and the women felt the weight of continuity, the invisible thread linking past to present. Morning came with a gentle clarity, pale sunlight brushing through latticed windows. The women rose slowly, stretching stiff limbs, and prepared the house for another day. Cushions were plumped, flowers arranged, floors swept. Yet within these familiar routines was a subtle shift, an awareness that this day, too, was finite, that the cycles of observation, engagement, and reflection had a rhythm that would eventually yield to a closing chapter. Visitors arrived in the expected cadence, their faces familiar or new, their desires and temperaments subtly varied. The women guided each encounter with the same deliberate attentiveness, maintaining equilibrium, comfort, and professional grace. Every glance, gesture, and nuance was noted, catalogued, and remembered, but now with a quiet awareness that each observation was part of a living archive, one that would endure long after the individual moments had passed. Afternoon shadows lengthened. The women moved with a measured grace, attending to visitors, managing conversations, and sustaining the delicate balance of comfort and subtle performance. Their reflections became deeper, more contemplative, as they considered not only the behavior of those before them, but the nature of their own existence within this world. They pondered how their skills, honed through countless repetitions of seemingly identical days, had transformed them into keepers of human nuance, silent historians of gestures, intentions, and fleeting truths. Evening approached, soft and golden, and the visitors departed one by one. The house, once alive with subtle movements and quiet exchanges, fell into stillness. Floors were brushed, rooms aired, linens adjusted, and the last of the candles extinguished. The women gathered briefly in the main room, a momentary pause in the rhythm of labor. In the silence, there was recognition of the passing of time, of the impermanence of each encounter, and of the enduring patterns that would persist long after the day's end. Night settled, deep and encompassing. The women returned to their private spaces, weary yet resolute. Sheets embraced their bodies, warmth lingering, muscles relaxing, and consciousness softening. Observation persisted, not in immediate action, but in memory and reflection, the quiet ledger of the day, now integrated into the ongoing understanding that had grown over countless cycles. The moon traced its slow path across the sky, casting silvery shadows upon the house. Within that gentle light, there was a sense of closure, a natural pause in the endless cadence of day and night. The women allowed themselves a rare indulgence, the recognition of their own resilience, their own capacity to navigate a world of subtlety and expectation, and the quiet pride of mastery sustained over time. In these moments, the house itself seemed to acknowledge them, the walls heavy with memory, the floors worn smooth by countless footsteps, the air still rich with echoes of life lived in attentive care. It was a house of patterns, of cycles, of continuity, and now, for a night, a house of peace. Morning returned at last, pale and diffused, as it always did, but there was no rush. There was only the deliberate, unhurried cadence of preparing the house, arranging flowers, plumping cushions, and opening doors. Visitors would come, as they always did, but this day was framed differently. A quiet ending to the accumulated cycles, a recognition that the ledger of days had grown full, each repetition a testament to skill, patience, and the subtle artistry of human understanding. The women moved through the day with grace, attentive and composed, aware of their place within the rhythm of the house. Their gestures were measured, their attention deliberate, and their presence a gentle affirmation of continuity. Each encounter, each subtle exchange was observed, catalogued, and remembered not merely for the sake of labor, but as part of an enduring story, one that spanned beyond any individual day, beyond the fleeting presence of visitors, and into the quiet permanence of human connection and understanding. As dusk approached, golden and soft, the final visitors departed. The house grew still, heavy with memory and the faint echo of conversations. Floors were swept, rooms aired, linens adjusted, and the last traces of the day tended with care. The women gathered briefly, their faces calm, their movements deliberate, acknowledging the end of this cycle, this chapter of continuous repetition and careful observation. Night descended fully. Sheets embraced weary bodies, hair brushed and settled, warmth lingering, breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, consciousness softened. Observation persisted no longer as immediate action but as reflection, memory, and understanding, the final ledger now complete. A testament to days lived in attentive care, to mastery earned through quiet patience, and to the subtle endurance that had defined the house for countless cycles. The moon shone pale and tranquil through latticed windows, illuminating the stillness. In that quiet, the women allowed themselves the simplest recognition that all that had been done, all that had been observed, all that had been recorded in memory and in practice was enough. The house, alive with the echoes of countless days, seemed to sigh in quiet acknowledgement, a partner in the long, unbroken chain of experience. With the closing of this day, there was a sense of completeness, not of finality in the world beyond. For life would continue, cycles would repeat, and visitors would return, but of completion within the house itself, within the carefully wrought rhythms of attention, observation, and subtle mastery. The ledger of human gestures, behaviors, and fleeting expressions had been meticulously tended, a record of life, endurance, and quiet artistry. The women, wrapped in sheets and warmth, allowed themselves to drift fully into rest. Their consciousness softened completely, muscles relaxed, and the house settled into silence. Moonlight traced the contours of walls and furniture, a gentle illumination of spaces that had known so much attention, care, and subtle labor. And in that quiet, a truth endured, that life, in its repetitions and rhythms, in its cycles of observation and reflection, was an art sustained through patience, attentiveness, and subtle mastery. Dawn would come again, as it always had, bringing light, visitors, and the familiar cadence of tasks. But for now, in this night, the house and its inhabitants rested in completion, the ledger of days full, the cycles acknowledged, and the quiet mastery of life within its walls established and preserved. This, finally, was the end.